Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here. I, I am Grace Willerton from UNM-Los Alamos. I've been an academic and career advisor up here for about 10 years. I'm working with motivational interviewing right now, which is why I was asked to present on this particular topic. I was introduced to this actually several years ago, about 2014, through the National Career Development Association conference, and I only caught the last half of the presentation. So I've been picking up pieces of it here and there since then. And then just last year, I finally got to go to a presentation by the New Mexico Motivational Interviewing Training and Consulting Organization. I had to make sure I got that right. They're in Albuquerque. They're a nonprofit grant-based organization that gave a training that I was able to take part in. It's a 2-day training. So I'm going to take that 2-day training and try to give you about 20 minutes version of it and give you as much as I can in the way that we use it in Los Alamos, and see, hopefully, if I can get your interest in it a little bit, and possibly, introduce you to some other resources or some ways that you may want to get involved in this as well. I found this most resonating, particularly during that 2-day training, to kind of fit with some of the things that I've experienced personally, as well as a lot of the things that I see with my own students. I was sitting at our front desk just a minute ago and answered a student phone call from someone who was very frustrated. So I feel your pain out there with our case study. So it can be very useful in times to use some of these techniques, even just to kind of still the waters or make sure our communication is effective. But it goes a lot deeper than that. So I'm hoping that I will be able to introduce you all to that today. So motivational interviewing was developed by actually some folks in Albuquerque, some counselors, Dr. William Miller, and Stephen Rolnick, who were using it with people who were expressing problems with drinking. And this was self-confessed concerns of theirs. They wanted to address these issues because they were just struggling with them. But motivational interviewing only works with people who are ambivalent about making a change. They have mixed feelings. They have conflicting feelings about this. This is based in person-centered counseling, Carl Rogers' theory. So it's very much about supporting the person, coming alongside the person, cherishing them as an autonomous individual who is capable of doing a lot more than they think they are. It also comes up with some tools and a practice, kind of a process to go through, as well as a mindset to use and to keep ourselves in as clinicians, as practitioners, to make sure that we are maintaining that person-centered focus and not kind of imposing on the decisions that this person is capable of making. It also tends to avoid some of the issues of normal trying to convince someone to do something. Anytime we're trying to argue, convince, persuade, debate, we tend to get a lot of head-to-head. If we take one side, naturally, the person we're talking to is going to take the other side. So we're always fighting this battle. And most likely, it's not going to get where we think it should go. And it's most likely not going to help their conflict with this either. And if it does, it may actually push them in the direction that may be more negative for them. So this approach that these two counselors came up with is trying to avoid those issues of that head-to-head fight and that struggle against each other. So it's a very collaborative process. It is looking at an issue together and coming up with some focus that they want to work on, some change that they may want to make, but they're ambiguous about it. And it's coming alongside them. But I will say right now, the hardest part of this one is not giving advice, because that goes right back to the beginning of this head-to-head. Well, have you tried this? Yeah, but, well, what do you think about this? Well, yeah, but it doesn't fit my schedule. It doesn't work with my process. I've already tried that one. There's so many reasons we can give. As soon as we start giving advice, they're going to come right back with the why it doesn't work. So this is a much more collaborative process, focusing on what they want to accomplish for their best interests. It's also using a little bit of narrative therapy, if you will. Narrative therapy looks a lot at the language we use. And there's a lot of research out there about spontaneous language being an actual motivator for actions. So there are two approaches that are two particular kinds of language that motivational interviewing looks at: sustained talk and change talk. Sustained talk is anything the person is saying about maintaining the status quo. Whatever they're doing right now, I don't want to change. Change talk is the opposite. Anything that might promote movement toward making that change. So it could be positive, it could be negative, but anything that's moving us away from the old and into the new change. And so the clinician practitioner comes alongside that person and at some point moves into this process of encouraging more change talk to move toward the resolution and toward that actual change. So the MI process is usually about 3 steps officially. And the 4th one is just a bonus if you get to that point. So they work on engaging first, and I'll have individual slides on each of these. So engaging with the other person, forming a relationship, and then focusing on a specific goal that they want to accomplish, whatever this change is, identifying that so you can work on it together. And then the clinician moves into evoking some of that change talk, along with some other positive features that can go in the person's favor. And then, if it's appropriate, forming a plan together and moving into that change together. And I say if it's appropriate because it goes right back to that idea of making suggestions, giving advice. This is something that is very intuitive to most of us. First thing we want to do when we hear a problem is we want to fix it. And that is pretty much standard across the human condition, but it is counterproductive for MI. So once we've worked through this idea of change and someone's ready to change, then at that point, it's okay to make a plan and possibly to offer suggestions if the person is open to that and willing at that time. So moving into that first phase, engaging. This is forming a relationship. This is building rapport. This is actually, again, one of the very common themes in counseling.
Kevin.
In person-centered counseling, looking at the therapeutic relationship. And this is actually one of the more interactive components, but also one of the strongest determinants of success in counseling, and often in MI as well, is how much the clinician actually shows that they care to this person. And empathy is a really big piece of that. Affirmation, recognizing the person's strengths, collaboration, not trying to dictate any movements to them, compassion, acceptance of them as they are, not trying to judge at all, not trying to sway one way or the other, though we'll get to that eventually, but making sure that we are honoring this person as a person. They get to make the decisions. They get to see where they're going with this. And then at some point, evoking and helping them recognize their own strengths that will move them forward into this. So one of the great illustrations that the MI presenters had at this 2-day conference was, this is like a person handing you little bits of things like flowers, and they will hand you a little piece of themselves as you're discussing things. And you collect all of these pieces. And with MI and some of the strategies that you use, you give them back a beautiful bouquet of flowers so they see themselves as beautiful and capable and autonomous and being able to make this decision and this choice for themselves. I know I don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to share with you all a video that was kind of narrated by someone they call the Queen of Reflection. She is part of the MI world, Brene Brown, and she has this video about empathy and clarifying really what that is. So I want to share this with you all. This is on YouTube, so you can search for it yourselves too. You hear it all right?
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So keeping that in mind, I think that fits perfectly with our case study today. So again, thank you for sharing that. And you were doing an excellent job with empathy, just going, I know this is horrible getting the runaround. And that's building rapport right there, and it shows you care, and it can change the whole attitude of that conversation. So well done. That was very good. Hang in there. So that's, again, the cornerstone of sitting with people when they're looking at this ambiguity, trying to figure out how to change. I know this isn't great, but I still kind of like it. How do I address this issue? So the next phase, once you have this relationship, once you have this trust, once you can go a little deeper comfortably, then you can look at focusing on a specific change issue together. What is it specifically that we want to change? Is it drinking? Is it student academic issues? What is it that we're looking at here? And it could be a process as you discuss certain things. There could be a lot of changes that come up that they're ambiguous about. So it could be a little bit of an evolution. Let's work on this one for now, and then maybe we'll address some of these others later, or maybe something else comes up and that's a little more pressing and we can focus on that one for a minute. But some ways to do this is looking at what they call the miracle question. If you woke up tomorrow and everything was beautiful and better and someone just took a magic wand and touched it and poof, what would that look like? So what would be better? What would be different? And then again, some of the really key points about this particular phase is staying neutral. Just getting the information on both sides of this change. What's keeping you here? And what are you looking at that wants to move forward? But trying to stay neutral about it so that at this point, we're not trying to sway either direction. And if you have some idea about where they want to go with this and you're not quite sure, it's good to ask permission of that person before you start saying, well, why don't we talk about this thing over here? Because I see a lot of ambiguity around that. Ask before you start jumping into some of those things, so that if they want to go there, they can go with you on that, or they may still not quite be comfortable doing that yet. But at this point, this is a time to draw attention to that change and really focus in on the one thing that they want to work on for the moment. And then you have to stop and ask yourself if that's an appropriate place for you to go with them. And depending on your relationship, it might be fantastic. But if it's, say, myself and a student, and they're talking about a lot more personal issues, the MI coordinators brought up ideas like if they want to have a child, or if they want to transition their gender, certain things like that I'm probably not qualified to get into in an appropriate context this way. I can support them as a friend and as an advisor, but I'm probably not a good person to advise them in that particular area. So at that point, I would probably not go into the rest of the MI conversation, but I would offer resources and anything else I could to support them in making that decision with the appropriate contact. So that's something that every person has to work with when they're coming up to this kind of decision. But if you're moving forward, then it moves into the actual MI practice, the evoking of the change talk that we want to see. Again, the more people use spontaneous, honest talk about making this change, the more likely they are to change. The more they use sustained talk, honestly, openly, with thought, the more they are likely to stay the same. And it is possible to influence people to use more change talk. So if you're both in agreement that this is where you want to go, then you can really narrow the focus toward just the change side. And you can do that with a few different methods. You can draw out their reasons. The reasons are going to be big for why they want to change. That's going to go really deep into their motivations. But you can also look at both, like I said, some negative reasons to move away from the old stuff. If they want to quit smoking, maybe then, it costs a lot of money. They're burning holes in their shirts. Nobody wants to be around them because they smell. They could be getting emphysema every other month now. Who knows? Those are some big negatives. We should probably think about some of those, but we're going to let the person bring those up themselves because that's part of the change talk. Negatives against the old, positives toward the new. If we want to quit smoking, now we have extra money for certain things that we want to do. Maybe now we can be around our grandchild, something like that. Those are the positives that are going to move us toward change. So that's also change talk. Both of those are going to be beneficial to help the person see, yes, I want to make this change. And prompting any kind of speech that direction is going to be beneficial. They have an acronym for some of these, the last little points down here. They call it darn cat. Desire, ability, needs, intention. I think I'm leaving one or two of them out. I missed the R, the reason for changing. The need to change, their ability to make this change, their intention, some of the things they've already done, making some actions this direction already. Any kinds of talking about those will prompt them to move toward more of that change talk and give you more of that change talk. And then if you've moved through that to a point where it's almost all change talk, and we're not even looking at any positives from the old, we're all change talk now, no sustaining, then it's possible, if appropriate, to move into that planning phase. But again, only when they're ready. And only if they want to move into that. Also, maybe only if they're stuck. They might have a great idea already of how to move into this change. They just haven't quite been willing to commit to it yet. So maybe that could be part of the plan, some sort of commitment or accountability check-in, something like that. But letting them lead instead of giving them suggestions is going to be important in, again, allowing that autonomy and honoring them to make that choice for themselves. If they do get stuck, though, and I've tried to make this change before and I'm out of ideas, that's a good point when we can ask if we can give some suggestions. We've been saving these up since the beginning. Now it's okay to ask to offer some of these. And it's good to offer several at once, so it's not really directing them. It's still allowing them to make that choice with all of these options that they could try. Thankfully, we don't have to do this blindly. There are some wonderful techniques that they have kind of crafted to help elicit this change talk. The best methods that they have are the OARS techniques. It starts with open-ended questions, asking what and how. Unfortunately, why tends to be a really common question that we like to ask, but it can come with a lot of unintentional judgments. We also like to ask a lot of, have you thought about, or do you think about, what do you think about? And now we're offering suggestions again. This is more like, what would it look like to make this change? What would some of the benefits be? How would this affect your relationship with so-and-so? Tell me more about this positive thing that you're looking at. Or I wonder what it would seem like. I wonder how it would feel to try this out. They also use an importance scale in MI. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how important would this change be to your financial status or your relationship with someone? Or in general, how important is this to you in general? And then a follow-up question is really interesting to me. If they offer a 6, say, why not a 5? If you offer a lower number, now they have to give you the reasons why it's better than that. And that's change. That's change talk, moving toward the positive side of making this change. If I offer a 6 and then the MI comes back with a 7, well, now I'm going to offer all the reasons why it wasn't good to change. That's why it was lower. We want it on the positive. We want them to say, why not a 5? Because of all these other good things that are over here. Maybe I'll even bump it up to a 7. Who knows? So that's a really neat strategy to use with the open-ended questions. Again, open-ended questions, you can use some closed-ended questions, but we're looking for dialogue. We're looking for them to think of these things on their own. The vast majority of the time, people actually have already thought about all the answers that they need. We just haven't actually acknowledged them yet or followed them yet, usually one or the other. So a lot of counseling techniques are prompting people just to look at their own reasons for things and their own thought process. So these open-ended questions draw out a lot more of those thoughts. Unfortunately, though, they can also start to feel like an interrogation. So MI recommends probably no more than 2 in a row. Change it up a little bit with some of these other techniques. Affirmations are a really great one. I noticed several people doing that with our case study already, because affirmations are acknowledgement of the things we're already doing right. And that's really important for our self-esteem, for our autonomy, for feeling like, yes, I can actually make this change. Your capabilities in there. So recognizing choices that they have made in a good direction, characteristics that have brought them this far, strengths, accomplishments that they have done, even if it's unrelated to this, looking at those other accomplishments can help them see that, yes, they are capable of making this other change, even if it's daunting. Reflections are probably the biggest tool that MI uses to move forward with this change talk. And they're not questions, they're statements, which is also really hard to do. They had us practice this a lot. They say a question, if you go up at the end, that's actually a kind of a faulty reflection or a broken reflection. It didn't quite work the way it wanted, because then it can sound like it's judging or leading. But a reflection is merely a restatement, or perhaps a paraphrasing, or even a little bit of an educated guess about what they're trying to say. So if they offer a statement about this reason that they want to change, you can simplify it and shape it back to them. And we talked a little bit about that as well. Thank you, Erica, for acknowledging that reflection process, saying, this is what I'm hearing from you. That's a little bit of that bouquet of flowers too. Here's all these pieces that they've given you, and you hand them back a clearer picture. And maybe even something that they hadn't thought about before, but you've noticed, you've picked up on, if you're listening really carefully, you can pick up on maybe some feelings that they haven't acknowledged yet, or that they're kind of dancing around, but they kind of need to say, or they need to hear. Again, this is really nice to kind of intersperse more of these than the questions. So maybe even every 2 or 3 reflections for every one question. Trying to keep it more on this side. If you ever get to see a video of Brene Brown, the lady who narrated the empathy video, she goes for about a 20-minute conversation, and I think she asks about 2 questions. And the vast majority of her side of the conversation is reflection, and then summaries, slightly longer sections of information, reduced down to actually a more streamlined reflection. So more talk from the person. If you need to summarize, it's actually much smaller. So the more they add, the less you summarize, kind of hit the highlights of it. But if you're given a lot of information, or if you're transitioning to a new part of the conversation, if you needed to emphasize something, you really trim it down. Boy, it's like shining a flashlight on it. Or if you need to kind of wrap up for the day or for that particular time, and talk about all the things that you've come so far with them already. So those are, they are not the most intuitive techniques, I will say that, but they are extremely valuable and effective. And the more we do them, the better we get at them. So the MI trainers even recommended that we, maybe try these on some family members from time to time, or try them in the grocery store, and just start to experiment with them. And then obviously, of course, if you can get any kind of training from these people, they have excellent trainings and follow-ups and conversations about how to practice these more and employ them. So we have tried to, I'm working on implementing some of these with my colleagues here at UNM-Los Alamos. In my personal work with my students, I found them useful in a variety of applications. Initially with trying to increase career services at UNM-LA, and that's looking at maybe asking them, what would it look like if you could clarify your long-term goal a little bit more? How would that affect your academics? Encouraging changing their majors. What would it feel like to try something out over here? What would it look like to you personally to think about this other option that we've been discussing? If you identified as that, what would it feel like? And the biggest one that we've tried to use most recently is with our probation contracts. So this is just a sample of one page. What used to be pretty standard, here's our intake information, here's the actions that you need to do, now we're signing off. But we've inserted some of these questions for students to work on their own before our conversation about probation if possible, and then have a conversation in our probation meetings about what it is that's been going on. So we kind of clarify the issue, but then looking at some of those reasons for change. What are your long-term goals? How is this going to affect your long-term goals if we can make these changes? What were some of the things that were holding you back? That's negative talk about the old stuff, but it's still change talk. So what's the old stuff holding you back? What are some things that could be better if those change? Where is this going to go for you? What kind of characteristics do you have that will help you be successful in the future here? And how are you going to use those strengths? These are all open-ended questions. How are you going to do this? What are these strengths about you? So that they get to elicit this themselves and they come up with the ideas. So we have put this in place. We haven't been doing this very long yet, so I don't have any results for you all yet. But we've seen a lot more dialogue with students in the last couple semesters using this than personally that I have seen before. So I'm hopeful that we will see a lot more change about this very soon. A couple of resources for you here. This is the link for the Motivational Interviewing Training and Consulting organization that offered the training I participated in. And then the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers is the much larger organization that the initial founders started, with a ton of resources out there. There are countless books and programs and resources. So I hope you will avail yourselves of them and get to know more about this method, this approach. I hope it's been beneficial for you all. So I will stop there. I know I have a few minutes. I'd love to take questions.
Thank you so much for that, Grace. That was just illuminating to hear more about this process, because I was not familiar with it. And now I want to take a training. So yes, let's all give Grace a round of applause, either virtually or physically. And questions. As Grace said, we have a couple more minutes for questions or comments.
Grace, what do you do when you find that when you're going to that second phase and they're elaborating on the positives and negatives and they're just really stuck in a lot of negatives without steering it too much? Is it reflections on, without like doing the kind of sympathy sort of thing to try to get an individual who's stuck in negative? Because I've had it happen a lot.
That's definitely a very tricky place, especially if it's, you say, that probation conversation and they're at the bottom of their GPA and they know that they're in trouble, but they're just kind of spiraling. They don't quite know where to go. I think a lot of those reflections are good, but I try to offer, actually in our probation contract, we even added a little section that's called positive comments from advisors. I try to offer a little glimmer of some of the things that are true, that are genuine strengths of theirs. So in those conversations, we do talk about the negatives. We talk about how things have not worked so well, but we look for successes as well. So we talk about what other classes have looked like, what were successful things in the past, what other strategies have you used that have been successful, whether it's here or high school or someplace else. What sort of resources do you have around you to support you with this? Trying to find some of those positives somewhere so that we can get a little glimmer of light in there that is not just a silver lining, but it's something that can actually help them move forward. Did that answer your question?
Yes, very much. It's just it's a hard place to get out of, and because usually people don't come to you for motivational, well, for advice when they're in a good place. They've let it go way too long, and you're really the last hope. So they can get really negative and feel like we're in deep trouble. So,
and I never want to move on from that too quickly. That's the empathy piece, right? Just acknowledging, yes, I'm sorry, this has been a really hard journey for you. This has been an uphill battle from the start, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And we want to be here for you to support you. We want to be part of your support system to make this better.
Mm-hmm.
And in the chat, we had a comment from Cami about the questions that you're using and how great they are. Would you be willing to share your PowerPoint with us, as well as perhaps like the probation document that you're using with those questions?
Absolutely, I'd be happy. Martha, should I just send those to you? And then
yeah, if you send them to me, I'll make sure that everyone on this call, as well as like our larger, ECHO group, has access to those.
I'd be delighted.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Erica.
Grace, I know that there are MI-specific guidebooks for people in various fields. Like I've seen one for medicine and I've seen one for therapy. Have you ever seen one adapted more specifically for what you all are engaged in, this concept of counseling, advising, navigating, etc.? Have you? Do you think one exists?
I haven't seen one specifically yet. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to do a lot of looking in the last couple of years here with COVID and all. But it would definitely be something worth pursuing.
Maybe it's time to write one.
All right. Any other last questions or comments?
I'll just add really quickly, and I did put that in the chat also to James. But the biggest thing with the client-centered therapy, or that client-centered focus, is really paraphrasing what they're saying, and then really going into the feelings about it, because that's really what they're wanting to talk to you about, but they're sugarcoating it. And then just that unconditional positive regard as well. The other thing I was going to wanted to touch on was being okay with the silence with client-centered, because how Grace was saying, we want to jump in and offer help, right? We're the helpers in our offices. And so really just being okay with that silence and letting them, or that pause, let them pause, you pause before you, ask that next open-ended question. But really the open-ended questions, that is how you're going to get, have that conversation, and think about those open-ended questions that you're asking your partners or your children. You want to ask them those open-ended questions. And so I'm trying to take that to your offices.
Thank you both. I took I think an 8-week course out of CNM on motivational coaching. And I found that, I really could promote you guys directing people toward developing the skill. At 8 weeks, it really seemed rushed to get in a lot of the stuff you need. It's a very high level skill to be able to do a good job with motivational coaching. I found I learned a lot of things that were somewhat counterintuitive when studying it. So I would encourage everybody to take any of the classes that have been run recently. It would help develop those skills, because they are real. They're things they're muscles that need to be developed, and they take a significant amount of time to do so.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Grace. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I'm also interested in now doing some training in motivational interviewing. I think it it just speaks so highly of New Mexico and all that we have to offer, to hear that something like motivational interviewing is coming out of our state, and as well as something like ECHO, like we're doing right now. And so just very happy to share this space with you all.